right, Mike, my watch says 6 o'clock. What about yours?
Yeah, let's hit it.
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and kick off. Welcome, everyone, to WOPN Wine Month. We don't have to explain while we're doing it this way this year. Trust me, we all wish we could be joining you for our wonderful opportunity at the World of Pinot Noir, always being held at the Bacara Resort in Santa Barbara. But we are so excited because the World of Pinot Noir has decided that it's time to take this party all month long. There are so many stories, so many great wines, and so many awesome winemakers that frankly, this is such a unique opportunity because it allows us to connect with so many folks as we're going through this particular format. We are so honored to have David Glancy, our master sommelier and founder of the San Francisco Wine School, with us again this year. We have asked David a pretty tall order. Typically, we ask him to help us lead one seminar about Burgundy, and we came this year and we said, we're putting a really cool box of wine together that's been curated by our sommelier team that all of you on the on this webinar today have purchased. And we said, David, we're going to do 4 seminars. And his jaw dropped. He said, what? 4 seminars? But in any case, we know he has it in him because he is one of 12 people in the world to hold both the Master Sommelier Diploma and a Certified Wine Educator credential. And if I didn't already mention it, he is the founder of the San Francisco Wine School. But before we turn the show over to David, I want to give a big shout out to my colleague, Mike Dawson, who is also with us, who's going to give you a couple of reminders of how we're going to run tonight in terms of questions and answers and so on and so forth. So Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy, and thank you everyone for joining in. Really psyched to get this first seminar going. Just one sort of order of business in terms of questions that you're going to have throughout the tasting. If you've done Zoom or not, it doesn't matter, but one thing we want to do is stick to the Q&A button that you see on the bottom of your screen. Ask your questions there, just because it's going to be easier for us all to monitor them, much easier than the chat. So don't ask questions in the chat, ask them in the Q&A, and as we go throughout and at the end, we'll get those questions answered. So thank you.
All right, a couple other just final housekeeping items. So excited that you guys are joining us tonight. There is a whole month long full of seminars that you'll be joining us every Wednesday that you'll have access to. If you happen to miss one, we're actually recording all of these sessions. So immediately after, you'll be able to see the session on our website, and then you can decide based on your time, just like your favorite TV show, DVR style, when you want to join and really connect with these wines and these winemakers. Also, final note, we are also running a silent auction. So these wines that you're tasting tonight, you'll find some large format bottles, some also rare library selections, some unique opportunities to bid on wines that you will not find through regular retail channels. So check out our silent auction. Again, those funds help support education of Pinot Noir as a result in focusing on our mission. So tonight we're talking about the Burgundy, the West Coast connection. So Mr. Glancy, the show is yours.
Awesome. Ready to take it away. So thanks so much for having me as part of this panel and doing these 4 sessions. And there's some great wines. It's going to be fun to get through. Want to quickly introduce our 3 panelists. And forgive me, I'm going to do a brief background on each of you, and you can say more about yourselves when we get to your wines. And then I'm going to set the table for you, if you will. Just set the stage talking about how these 3 different places these wines come from today compare to each other, how they're connected in some way, shape, or form. And then we'll taste through all of them. I think it's great if anyone has, like me, a Coravin, and you can tap into all 3 bottles. But if not, invite some folks over 6 feet away with masks on and all that. But very quickly, so we have with us Sarah Wuethrich from Maggy Hawk. She's the winemaker there. I think this is fun. She grew up in Silicon Valley, Cupertino, go. And I love her story that she was at UC Davis, but she was there for an atmospheric science major, and she just needed a few extra credits, and her dad suggested she take an enology class. So that screwed things up, and she graduated with an enology degree. Anyway, she worked at St. Francis Winery, Lambert Bridge, co-founded a label for Naked Wines, and then in 2010 started as assistant winemaker for Copain. And at that point fell in love with Anderson Valley and kind of stuck there. That's okay. It's a great place to be. And then took over Jackson family's project at Siduri, and then to Maggy Hawk when that was started. We got Shane Moore is the winemaker from Gran, Moraine. He's from Idaho, a bachelor's degree in enology and viticulture from Washington State, but worked all over the world in wine, Canada, Western Australia, Israel's Golan Heights, and then Sonoma County. And he joined the team at Gran Moraine shortly after it was launched in 2013, and specializing in Pinot and Chard there. And he and his wines like reggae and more. Patrick Will has done everything in the industry. He is vice president of Vintus. He's worked retail and wine production. 8 years as general manager of Firestone, not the tires, in Los Olivos. So he's got this connection to Santa Barbara. But he worked with consultant Andrei Chelichev during his time there. He is a past president of Santa Barbara County Vintners Association. He co-founded X Cellars and was there for nearly 15 years as the exclusive importer of some great names like Gigal, Beaumard, etc. Joined Vintus when they purchased X Cellars, and currently oversees 5 states and 10 brands in the Vintus portfolio, and is on the board for World of Pinot. Was that a quick enough version of you guys? I think. All right. On that note, Stacy, let's jump to the next slide. Let's get into the story, and they can tell us more. So love this quote, and Patrick can attest to if he said it in a more colorful way than this, but famed consultant to Napa primarily, but throughout California, Andrei Chelichev said, "God made Cabernet Sauvignon, the devil made Pinot Noir." And that sounds like an insult to Pinot Noir, but I think it only speaks to the fickleness of the grape, the temperament of it, how difficult it is. It's much easier to grow and produce Cabernet. So that's the deal. But when you get Pinot right, absolutely rocking. So looking at around the world, Pinot is made everywhere. We'll talk about the climates it prefers, but globally, France is #1, where it was born, and the United States is #2. So we're looking at that Burgundy West Coast connection today. So that's our focus. Lots of familiar and unfamiliar places in that top 10 list. But let's move on, because I want to get to the wines. That's the meat of it for a lot of people. So Pinot Noir definitely prefers cool climates. Now, Vitis vinifera, fine wine species of grapes, thrives at 30 to 50 degrees latitude. Pinot's a little more picky, with the vast majority of it falling in a slightly tighter band, 34 to 48 degrees. So that's classic old world cool climate spots like Champagne, various regions of Germany, certainly in Austria, Switzerland, northern Italy. And then in warmer regions, it just likes to go in cooler spots of warmer regions. So for the United States, that's our West Coast. Closer to the coast is cooler. So that's what we're going to focus on. And let's move on to the next. So I just thought that was fun. I was playing with latitudes. And for those of you, all of you who bought the whole WOPN case, this is the latitudes for all of the wines in the case. We're focusing on what's in the box today: Burgundy versus Willamette Valley, Oregon, specifically though, Yamhill, Carlton, and then Anderson Valley, but looking right around Philo. I think that's our closest spot to the Maggy Hawk vineyards. And you'll see the latitude of these other places, but we're looking at it being really, really close. Specifically Burgundy and Willamette Valley, people talk about all the time that they're at the same latitude. It's not quite the same. It's close. It's certainly closer than most other wine regions in the New World comparing to Burgundy. Philo looks like it's so much further away that it must be closer to the equator, that Anderson Valley must be significantly hotter than Willamette Valley. But we're going to look at other factors that make that not really true. And we can move on to the next. So tightening up, I actually made this slide for a class recently, or at least a class discussion, that no, Burgundy is not at the same latitude as Willamette Valley. Well, yes, it is. If we look at the southern tip of Burgundy compared to the northern tip of Willamette Valley, they are virtually identical latitudes there. Now, they both stretch about 2 degrees, Burgundy going north up to Chablis, Willamette Valley getting down to the south end, down by Eugene, a little warmer down there, perhaps, depending on where we're talking about. But really, really, so latitude, these two are spot on. But let's get into the rest of the picture. So latitude isn't the only story, as I said. Longitude is. Well, who cares about longitude? It's really proximity to the coast. And in other countries, which we'll talk about, Australia next week and going on to other places in the old world 4 weeks from now. But in California and Oregon, it's proximity to the coast that I'm talking about. So looking at this, you can see, hopefully you can see my mouse moving. No, you wouldn't see my mouse. Never mind. The far left picture, Anderson Valley, as I said, should be much warmer, but it's only 14 miles to the coast. And you can see Stacy's got her mouse going there. You could see we've got the Navarro River dumps out into the Pacific Ocean. And from there, it's actually running from southeast to northwest. And it's creating this gap in the coastal range, allowing cool breezes and fog to sneak into this valley, and it being significantly closer to the coast than either Willamette Valley or Burgundy are. Looking at Willamette Valley, it's 50 miles away. So it's not really that close at all. It's certainly closer than the northeastern ports of Oregon, such as the Rocks District of Milton Freewater. Totally different climate over there. So it has some proximity, but there's a coastal mountain range that is blocking access for the cool breezes and fog to getting to Willamette Valley. I don't know about you guys, but I've spent some time in Portland and throughout the Willamette Valley, and I think of a lot of rain. Now, we get cool breezes and rain and that kind of influence coming through because there are gaps. The most notable gap is the Van Duzer Gap, which is one of the new AVAs there. But there are other spots where cool breezes sneak through as far as 50 miles inland and even more. And on the opposite side, it's straddled between the coastal range and the Willamette River there. So cooling influence, but it's north of us. Burgundy is the furthest from the coast, 300 miles away. And it's about 300 miles due west to the Atlantic, and also about 3 miles going sort of northwest to the English Channel. So they're kind of getting in two directions, but it is blocked by the Côte d'Or slightly and the Massif Central also slightly. But definitely there is frost risk, there is hail risk, there's all sorts of risks in Burgundy. And I listed here in the slide that it's a north-south graben. It is essentially a valley, but a graben is where it lifted up due to tectonic or volcanic movement and then collapsed into itself as opposed to a river valley. More than you need to know. So what does that mean for the climate specifically? Temperatures, you can look at this, really, really close between these three regions. Now I said Anderson Valley, this southern latitude compared to Willamette and Burgundy, it should be much warmer. But if we look at the lows in Anderson Valley, it's actually colder in Anderson Valley than the other two. Again, due to that proximity of to the coast, due to fog, they have a massive diurnal temperature shift, typically 45 degrees or so on a really hot day. It might even hit 90 sometimes in the Anderson Valley, but chances are at night, you better hope you're not out in a toga. So it's gonna get cold for sure. So UC Davis heat summation scale, or the Winkler-Amarine scale. Anderson Valley is called zone 1 to 2, because when it gets hot, it gets hotter than Willamette Valley or Burgundy, but at night it gets colder. So Willamette Valley and Burgundy, you look at that, so similar, both zone 1, really in that very, very similar temperature range. And let's go to the next slide. What else do we have? Certainly, sunshine is a factor for ripeness. Grapes, vines do not grow without sunshine, without photosynthesis. So that's going to be a factor. But wind, fog, rain, all of that's going to come in. If we look at rainfall, Anderson Valley is getting 40 inches a year versus Willamette Valley, 29 inches a year. I didn't put in Burgundy's annual, but I looked at the summer rainfall, because that's where it's a key difference, because both Willamette Valley and Anderson Valley are drier in the summer than Burgundy is. So Anderson Valley, very, very dry. And we look at all the fires, Anderson Valley and other places in California, we understand that dryness is a big issue here. Willamette Valley, though, I think of Portland and the rain. It's really not as much as it's made out to be, certainly not in the summer. And there is a difference between a light, hot, sunny rain than there is to, a downpour in the cold and dark. So Willamette Valley gets less than an inch a year, less than an inch a month in the summer, while Burgundy's getting close to 2 inches a month. Big issue. Willamette Valley is sunnier than Burgundy, but it's tough to compete with the 53% clouds in Burgundy. It is challenging weather, to say the least. And let's go to the next one. Cool. So just my last 2 slides before we get into talking about these wines is sort of the French connection, because the title of this is, the Burgundy-West Coast connection. So I thought I'd look at when the grapes came over. Pinot Noir originates in Burgundy. Well, maybe Jura or Savoie. Genetically, we can look at it, how it comes down, and looking at Chardonnay being a Gouais Blanc cross with Pinot, and all the different Pinots being related. Pinot Blanc being an albino, if you will, Pinot Gris also a mutation, all the different crosses and clones and variations that we have. But when did it get to California? In 1850, as far as we can tell, there is dispute over this, but Charles Lefranc brought Pinot Noir from France when he founded the New Almaden vineyards in the Santa Clara County. So Silicon Valley, more or less, not far from the Santa Cruz Mountains. Now, by the time we got to 1950, 100 years later, there was Pinot around. There were people like Martin Ray growing Pinot Noir, specializing it, super premium. There were other Pinot Noirs going, but by 1951, there were only 300 acres of Pinot Noir in California. So not much. Harold Olmo from UC Davis went and brought cuttings back from Pommard. So this is sort of our next influx of Burgundian cuttings, French Pinot Noir coming in. Oregon, there was viticulture happening much earlier than this. And there was even Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley prior to 1970. If we look at Charles Lett David Lett brought in Pinot Noir for Ivory Vineyards, but it was different clones. So some of the big changes that were happening in Willamette Valley, and Shane can speak to this, I'm sure, is, the Pommard clone being introduced by Dick Erath and Charles Corey in the 1970s. And a lot of people are talking about a significant increase in the quality of Pinot Noir once about a half dozen Dijon clones were introduced in the 80s. So connections. And let's go to the next slide. As far as wineries, we've got a connection too. Moet Chandon and Champagne opened a California sparkling house, Domaine Chandon, or Chandon of California now, in 1973. And they were followed by lots of different folks. Dutz, Mumm, Roederer, and Tattinger all followed with California sparkling wine houses owned by the French. they saw the potential of the land and climate here. Frankly, a lot easier for them to grow the grapes. And the last piece in Willamette Valley, 1987, Joseph Drouin started Domaine Drouin, and more recently, Jadot opened Resonance. That's it. Let's jump into the first region, and beauty. So we've got the idea is that I'm going to finish my blurb in the next few minutes and jump into the first wine here. So talking about the first wine, we're focused on the Côte de Beaune region, the southern half of the Côte d'Or, or slopes of gold. This escarpment, we basically have hillside on the west that is providing a bit of a weather break, not enough of one, but it is certainly giving slope to give maximum southeast or due east exposure for the vines to get more sunlight, the drainage of the soils, the mid slopes generally the best portions. And if we just focus on this piece, it's 17 miles long, and in a lot of places it's less than a mile wide. Altitude isn't really a significant factor here, and Côte de Beaune is sort of an outlier. Beaune is an outlier compared to the rest of Côte de Beaune, because it's really famous for white wine, but the Beaune appellation is almost entirely red, and I would argue the greatest wines from Beaune are red. And we can jump into this next slide too. All right, Patrick, why don't you tell us about the fortress of Domaine Chanson?
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be able to address you and to also present a little bit of about Domaine Chanson. What you're looking at is the barrel aging cellar of Domaine Chanson. It's called the Bastion. It is it's in the walls of the city of Beaune. Very old edifice that used to be a completely walled city. And this is one of 5 emplacements that were defensive in nature, meant to help defend the city against whoever was coming to bother them. And it is still standing, part of the historic wall of Beaune. The Chanson estate was begun in 1750. That was founded then, and they are proprietor negociant, meaning they own estate vineyards as well as acting as a negociant, purchasing and aging wines. And the estate is about 110 acres of vineyards, and they are focused on Beaune. As David was saying, Chanson owns 10 different premier crus in the appellation of Beaune proper, as well as some other crus around that north and south, all in the Côte de Beaune. And they are particularly famous for their Beaune bottlings. I should point out about I made the interesting mistake when I first visited the property. You may notice this is not a cellar. Most barrel cellars are underground. It's actually 4 stories of a bastion, as I said, where they age the wine in barriques. And I asked them when I first visited, I said, "How do you air condition this place? It's above ground." And they looked at me somewhat cross-eyed. They said, "The walls are 24 feet thick of solid stone. There's no need to air condition it. It stays at about 54 degrees year round. So it's a perfect place for aging wines." And that's the purpose of this. They have a facility in Savigny-les-Bains, just a tiny bit north of the city of Beaune, where they do the vinification in a very modern style. So maybe we see, I don't remember what the next slide is, but if you could take a quick, there we are. So this is an overview of the vineyards of Beaune. We're looking essentially, the top of the page is facing west essentially. And all these premier crus within the appellation of Beaune, north to south, the vineyards are very even, but the soil types vary depending upon where you are, from heavier clay on the north side, which is on the right of the screen, to more limestone down in the Clos des Mouches on the south side. So it's a varied soil series throughout that particular appellation. And what you see there, starting with number 5 and going to number 13, or 14, pardon me, are the vineyards in which Chanson owns property. And so what you have in the case, the wine that you have is called the Beaune Bastion. I think it's the 2018, and it's named after the bastion we just viewed. on the screen. And this is a blend of Premier Crus. Several other negociants do that. Jadot makes a Beaune Premier Cru. Bouchard makes a Beaune du Chateau, which I believe is 100% estate. But this bottling from Chanson is a blend of about 7 or 8, depends on the year, of their Premier Crus in their estate. So it's 100% estate, and but a blend from across the appellation. They have very small parcels in Vigne Franche, as you noted on the map there, and also Champimont, very small parcel there. So they're not enough to bottle separately. And then they select barrels from Touron, Clodimouche, Grève, Écu, and so on to make this wine. The élevage, and we can go to the next slide, that's fine. Élevage is in about 30% new oak, but one of the most important things to remember about Domaine Chanson is they're a bit unusual, and they're in the minority in that they vinify their Pinot Noirs with whole clusters. In other words, they do not destem. They put the entire clusters in the vats and ferment the wine that way with punch down, and it gives a little more tannic frame around the wine, as well as very lovely aromatic complexity. They do about a 8-day cold soak before the fermentation begins, and that allows the enzymes to work on not only the color in the skins, releasing that, but also releasing the aromatics. So this particular wine is blended and then aged in barrels for between 14 and 18 months, depending upon the vintage. And as the new oak percentage, they do not believe in using a lot. 30% is the maximum, even for their Grand Cru. They make a Chambertin, but they don't use expensive new oak at all. So I hope you'll enjoy this wine if you're tasting it this evening. It's a good idea to give it a swirl. 18 is a beautiful vintage, but a little reticent at this point. Not quite as effusive as 17 or the 19s, which we were just tasting earlier today. Out of barrel. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'm happy to field any questions at whatever time is later on, but thank you.
I think it's a lovely wine, Patrick. It's got, really, to me, pretty floral aromatics and, some nice tart red fruit in there, but there's enough ripeness to keep it really balanced. The tannins are not punishing. There's a black tea note that I think is really lovely, and it's elegant, I would say.
Yeah. Well, because of the vinification method, these wines need a little age, or if you're going to drink them young, it's really recommended to give them a little brief decant. It will help open up the aromatics, but these are structured wines. They are in good company in terms of this kind of whole cluster vinification, and the people who ascribe to that, DRC, Dujac, Topinomerme, Domaine de l'Arlot, and so forth. It's a relatively small number, but it is increasing. More and more, especially the young vintners in Burgundy, are going back to the whole cluster vinification, at least for part of their production, because of the additional complexity, additional structure, and so forth that it can add. And the problem is that you have to have absolutely clean fruit and ripe stems, and that requires very, very close attention to the viticulture and to the growing season. So a lot of work.
Yeah, and there's more and more people in Oregon and California playing with whole cluster, or at least partial whole cluster. So yes, be curious to see what Shane and Sarah have to say. And at last year's World of Pinot, heard that there are some producers who are actually de-stemming, drying the stems and adding the stems back in.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I worked with a winemaker very briefly who, way back in my past, who liked to destem the grapes and then take the stems up to the back pad and then chop them up and then put them into the wine. I will say that's not a very good idea. The sap in the stems is actually rather bitter. And one fellow who's a really brilliant practitioner in California of whole cluster fermentation, that's Greg Brewer at Brewer Clifton. He uses, as I said, whole clusters, but what he likes to do is they take their production, their grapes, and a bin, and they put the bins in a refrigerated room for about 3 days. And that does a few things. It slows down the chemistry, and it also helps to dry the stem cuts, which keeps the sap from oozing out into the wine. And Chanson does much the same thing. They have a cooling tunnel where they take each 2 kilo hod of grapes or cagé of grapes that they harvest, and it runs through the cooling tunnel, a 25-foot tunnel. They go from about 80 degrees Fahrenheit to 38 degrees Fahrenheit in about 6 minutes. So very modern style of vinification for a very old and historic estate.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
And Stacy, why don't we jump back to the slides and we'll get a little intro jumping into Yamhill Carlton. So Yamhill Carlton AVA is one of the warmest. It is actually registered as the warmest sub-AVA or nested AVA within the Willamette Valley. Many people would say that Van Duzer Corridor and maybe Eola Amity Hills being the cooler of them, but this is sheltered. Basically, there are hills on 3 sides around it, and you can see on the map in between the towns of Yamhill and Carlton, and that is that area there with Ribbon Ridge off to the east and Dundee Hills off to the southeast there. Also a fairly warm spot in Dundee Hills, but we tend to get a more ripe and sometimes dark style Pinot Noir out of Yamhill Carlton compared to the others. And let's advance. And Shane, why don't you tell us what you've got going up there?
Yeah, hi. I'm the winemaker there at Moraine. You can kind of see my office that's slightly hidden by the barberry bush there. But so Moraine, we're making all estate wines. We have 2 vineyards in the Yamhill Carlton, a small one surrounding the winery. If you're looking at the crab claw, let's go back one slide. I like maps. If you're looking at the crab claw, the winery itself is just above Yamhill, slightly to the east, and that's a smaller vineyard. We've got about 30 acres of Pinot Noir planted there. And the Moraine vineyard itself is one of the farthest west vineyards. If you're looking at Carlton, go just slightly northwest, almost all the way to the edge of the AVA itself. We've got a 200-acre vineyard planted there, and that's kind of where I'm making most of my wine. This wine, the 2018 Moraine, is 90% from our farther west vineyard, right next to Resonance as well, if you're familiar with the area. Like David said, kind of cool. It's an interesting place because we're in the rain shadow of Trask Mountain, one of the larger coastal range mountains. We don't get a lot of wind, so we're ripening pretty early. I'm one of the earlier pickers in the Willamette Valley. Probably some of the people in Dundee Hills will start picking. Stoller will start picking maybe a day or 2 earlier than me, and then we'll start picking the Moraine vineyard. So that's, first, second week of September. It has been the last 6-7 years. Without the wind, it's a little bit, the skins seem to be a little bit, I guess, less terse and lighter skins. I find, Yamhill Carlton often is talked about being like these big brooding wines, but when you get all the way to the west side of Yamhill Carlton, they kind of lighten up. It's a combination, I think, of that less wind and slight rain shadow. So it's pretty interesting growing region over there. I love that we can make some really elegant wines with some dark fruit and nice body. And even in 2018, which was a fairly warmish vintage, we're still putting wines in the bottle at 13.2. And 18 was great, all natural acidity. Just one of those years. 18 was about my 20th year making wine, and one of those years that I think it's probably the 3rd year I'd ever made wine that you literally just put grapes in a tank and basically walked away. It was great. I love that. The less, the better. The wine's looking great today. I'm really happy with it. It's about 20% whole cluster, minimal new oak as well. We're doing 20 to 30% new oak. I can't remember. Generally, year to year, it changes a little bit. But oh, look at that. That could help me. There we are. Yeah.
Hey,
and-
Shane, Danielle has a question and asked, do you like the comparison to Burgundy?
Do I like the comparison to Burgundy? I mean, we owe a lot to Burgundy. I think Oregon as a wine region kind of stands on its own, though. If we just compare ourselves to Burgundy all the time, you're not being yourself. It's like being the middle child, right? It's like if you're being compared to your older son or your older brother and your younger sister all the time, you get kind of forgotten about. So we don't want to do that so much. But yeah, it's apt. We're a little bit more maritime than Burgundy, not so continental. A lot of the time though, our average growing degree days are less. So yeah, it's the same but different.
I think it's really helpful to compare Pinot Noir from anywhere to Burgundy. But to Shane's point, I don't think Oregon should be trying to make Burgundy. They've got to do their own thing and understand how they're different and how they're the same. But yeah, this has that typical dark fruit and structure, but it's got acid, it's lower alcohol. Yeah, it's got elegance and power.
Yeah, it's the iron fist and the velvet glove, as I like to think of my wines often. But yeah, I love going to Burgundy. I love drinking those wines. I love being over there, and I love trading wines. But our soils are different, our climates are different. That's the end of the day, what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Any other questions popping in? All right. Well, we're trying to move quickly. We're moving into California. So I just wanted to give a little perspective here in that, we already had Pinot Noir, as I said, in 1951, when Professor Olmos went over to Burgundy and got more grapes. And in the 1960s, there was a big push for Monterey and Santa Barbara specifically because the UC Davis heat summation scale, Winkler-Amarine scale, identified those places as being really good for Pinot Noir. So we had a big boost in the 1960s. But even after that, in 1982, it was only the 11th most widely planted grape in California. I love this, after Ruby Cabernet, which in 1933 was the #1 red grape in California. But by 2016, it became the 3rd most widely planted grape after the king and queen, if you will, Chardonnay and Cabernet. Certainly, a big portion of this is the sideways effect. We're looking at, it was crazy. It was something like, I'm trying to remember, it was like a 70% increase in Pinot Noir consumption in 1 year. It was astronomical amount. But where is Pinot grown in California? Again, the cooler zones, coastal areas. Don't be looking for Sierra foothills and Lodi Pinot Noir. You see that on the label, just run the other way. All right, no, there are exceptions. It can be done, but generally look at cool climate. So what do we have? Sonoma County is the leader. Now, there's a lot of acreage there to begin with, but they're at the top of things. Again, a coastal county, Monterey, coastal county, Santa Barbara. Napa, well, a good chunk of that is in Carneros on the Bay. And Mendocino, most of that is in the Anderson Valley. And we can move on. So jumping into Anderson Valley, this is just the same image I had before, but bigger. And it really allows you to see the mouth of the Navarro River, the gap in the coastal range there. And we're seeing it go where the wineries are clustered in this northwest to southeast valley. We're seeing it from Navarro, is the far western portion referred to as the deep end. Then we have Philo sort of in the middle, and then Boonville is the far eastern closest to Highway 101 and civilization. We don't have time to talk about speaking Boontling, but Sarah, I do want to know if you speak Boontling. But what's that?
I'm learning. Yeah, I'm learning.
Awesome. They don't print dictionaries, do they?
They do. Actually, there is a book out there with a glossary of terms. And there is still a culture within the Valley that speaks it and wants to continue to teach the future generations of it.
So I'm hoping at some point you will teach me how to say something offensive in Boontling. Okay.
I'd be happy to.
Maybe not now. But definitely, Pinot Noir is king here. There is Chardonnay. There are people making Blanc de Pinot Noir still wines for sure. And there's an awful lot of sparkling wine, Alsatian varietals as well. But Pinot is the king here for sure. And I should probably let you talk about it because you've been living there, living and breathing it, and for a long stretch.
I don't get to live there. I live in Sonoma County, but I am up there all the time, and I'm so blessed to be part of the community. So Maggy Hawk is situated at the deep end of the valley, like you mentioned. It's in between Philo and Navarro, so on the far northwest corner of Anderson Valley. The amazing thing about this area for grape growing is how small it is, but how diverse it is. So it's 15 miles long by 1 mile wide, and we are surrounded by what we're soon defining as subregions, and the East Ridge and the West Ridge play a part in that. And so Maggy Hawk sits on the deep end where we are in direct contact with the cool climate that comes up from the Navarro River and the Pacific Ocean. So we're kind of in the upper echelon neighborhood, I would say, of Anderson Valley. We are surrounded by amazing other Pinot Noir vineyards like Wendling and Kaiser and Bear Wallow. So we're in really, really good company up there. And so what you guys are tasting, there's the picture of Maggy Hawk. The vineyard itself is 58 acres, all planted to Pinot Noir back in the early 2000s. And my goal is to see those vines last for another 20, 30 years. So we're, as a steward of the land and of the wines that the vines that I'm making wine from, that's my goal, is to see us move in that direction with regenerative agriculture. And what you're seeing right now is the heart and soul of Maggy Hawk. The wine that is featured in your case is Jolie from the 2018 vintage. That vintage, we were lucky enough to blend from every single clone at that vineyard. The primary component of that blend is the 115 clone from Block 9. The unique thing about Maggy Hawk is, although it isn't the highest elevation, because that's another really important factor of Anderson Valley vineyards, is how different the elevations are from the East Ridge to the valley floor. Maggy Hawk, we go between 300 and 500 feet elevation, but the slope and aspects of all of the blocks that I work with are incredible. And so I have such diversity of wines from a single site, and that's really the exercise here for all of the Maggy Hawk Pinot Noirs, is to express how much difference can come from a single site. So the Jolie, we have the 5 clones that are planted, which are 115, 667, 777, Vadensville, and Pomard 5. And I feel like 115 just is the really light, pretty one, lots of red fruit and florals with a killer acid texture. I'm really happy to be able to express Anderson Valley through this wine in particular. I think it really does a good job of that.
Yeah, fun. How many different Pinots do you make?
So we make 4, and Jolie, I kind of start on the color spectrum. So Jolie is the more red fruit, higher acid wine. Then we have a Fleet, which is what we call the whole cluster blend. So I do incorporate whole cluster in my fermentations. I do a destemmed portion and a whole cluster portion, anywhere between 30 and 50% of the same block and clone for each block that I source from. It makes it a little finicky in the cellar, but ultimately that gives me a lot of different options when I'm sitting down to the blending table. And then unforgettable is kind of like the Goldilocks. It's the red fruit and the black fruit. It has a little spice, and it just takes it down a step on in that blue purple kind of spectrum of color. And then the Stormin is our big brooding Pinot Noir, very heavy base notes in this wine, lots of tannin, lots of spice. So there's really something for everybody here at in this program.
Fun. Have you played with sparkling? I know Shane is making some beautiful sparkling up at Gran Moraine. How about you?
Not officially, not to say that it won't happen in the future, but I did experiment with a pet nat last harvest from 115 clone, and it's pretty awesome.
Great. It's funny. So Katie Rogers, I see, has typed in a couple questions in the Q&A, and I laughed when you said pet nat, only because I was thinking about typing an answer to Katie, because she said, we've seen trends over the years come and go, IPNC, native yeast, 100% whole cluster fermentation. What's the next trend you see happening with Pinot Noir, right or wrong? And I almost typed pet nats unfiltered with chunks floating.
Yeah. So I did do, actually, I do make a white Pinot Noir from Maggy Hawk, as well as a Chardonnay from a high elevation site in Anderson Valley. But what I did was I took some of the white Pinot Noir and then I made a pet nat out of it. So that was really fun.
Nice, nice. And that is really a trend too. I mean, both Willamette Valley and in Anderson Valley. The first I saw of it was Champ de Rêve, their Blanc de Pinot Noir, which to me, that was really fun to sit down and have their Chardonnay next to their Blanc de Pinot Noir, tasting them side by side. Yeah, that's fun. I don't know.
It'll certainly stump people if you put it into a glass and you're like, guess this variety. I think it really stumps a lot of people because it's a white wine, but it crosses over into, red fruit profiles, like rosé almost. So I think it's a good one to stump your sommelier friends, your wine friends.
Yeah. Cool. Shane, for a moment, that looked like you were pouring a lager, but no. Okay.
The wife is requesting some wine, so I have to oblige.
Yes.
Good call. And I'm sorry, I did want to say something about your wine, Sarah. Just it is, by far the lightest color, and Shane's was the darkest. And, for consumers who are expecting purple Pinots, they might have this apprehension that, oh, this is going to be light, but the mouthfeel is so rich and ripe. It still has acid, but I would say it has the most weight. And though low alcohol compared to the grand scheme of things, it's warmer in the alcohol comparatively to the other two, but beautiful aromatics and mouthfeel.
Thank you. Yeah, so the way we do use pump overs for cap management, I did incorporate a little bit of the whole cluster lots in this particular blend for the 18. It was 20%, and then I used 20% new French oak. And in my mind, it's not necessarily about the percentage of new oak more than the quality of coopers that I'm choosing to accentuate, or rather not have such an impact from the cooper end, but more give them a frame to show more of the vineyard than the cooper's thumbprint. So thank you for that compliment. I really think that this is a great example of Anderson Valley Pinot Noir and the potential there. And I think that it's relatively new on the world stage, and it deserves to be, lifted up and brought to people's attention. So that's why I'm here.
Sarah, we have a quick question from Nathan Carlson about, asking what your average fermentation lot size is.
Oh yeah, 3 to 5 tons would be the average, but I do have T-bins, I have 2 tonners, and but the largest is 5 tons. and it's really, whole cluster takes up a lot of space in a tank. So we have to sometimes utilize those, but on average, I would say like 3 is the sweet spot for me.
How about the rest of you? Can you chime in on that?
Yeah, I have 3-tonners and 5-tonners. I hate anything smaller. I just hate fermenting in like 1-ton tanks. It makes me sad.
Chansons all over the place. They have various sizes of lots depending upon the size of the vineyard, but generally speaking, they would be in the 5-ton range. With their new fermenters, they have a range of different size fermenters they can use for depending upon the vineyard plot.
Cellar logistics play a huge role in timing of things. I mean, you have this plan in mind and then it can go completely out the window.
Sometimes you have to use the tank that's available.
Right. Yep.
That's for
Yeah.
sure.
I have an outside winery, so I need some volume to get the tanks warm too. Otherwise, not so good.
Kate is trying to ask, she's saying that this wine is making her hungry. She's wondering how your mushroom foraging season is going.
Oh, well, morels are going to hit like real soon. Looking at morels in 2 weeks. So yeah, it's going to be a good morel season. I'm very excited.
Skip the death caps. That would be.
Oh yeah, no, those are the Amanitas. We don't pick those so much.
Wow. Multi-talented. So Katie asked another question, which of the regions is most affected by weather in regards to timing of harvest, pressure to get the grapes coming in before rain or winter comes? I'm going to just quickly speak for everyone and say Burgundy.
Yeah, well, you know, there's always pressure in Burgundy, particularly with the tendency. It's a continental climate and it can be quite humid. You don't have the dry. It's not dry like California. So you've got different kinds of pressure. You've got the pressure just on the ripening of the grapes. You have the potential rain. You have disease pressure in some vintages like 2018, where there was a lot of mildew early in the year, which had to be treated. So you know, it's always real brinksmanship in Burgundy, especially since the rains have generally start in late September. They have had a couple of years of drought, which is true of all of Europe. You've even seen it in Germany, of course, with now you're finding great Pinot Noirs coming out of the Mosel and the Saar Ruwer area. And that has to do with changing climate as well as the drought that's been affecting Europe for a while, like here. But yeah, Burgundy's a tough place to grow grapes, but it's very gratifying if you can do it.
Yeah, climate change is making it harder and harder to predict some of these things. I gotta say, the last time I was in the Mosel, everyone thinks, you know, Mosel can't do Pinot Noir. We got to get it from Rheingau or Baden or Pfalz, or the R. But the first winery I visited in the Mosel poured me their Syrah.
That's well, that's a sign of the times.
Yeah, not for export. And it was clearly cold climate, black pepper in your face, but it was pretty tasty. Yeah.
Well, I have recently had experience. Marcus Molitor makes a wide range of wines from the Mosel, and he makes some single vineyard Pinot Noirs from the Brandenburg, one of the vineyards in the Brandenburg area, and it's they're 14% alcohol without any chaptalization. So that is definitely a sign of the times.
Yeah. Good fun. Well, we were told 30 to 45 minutes and we've used 54. If you give me any time slot, I can promise I can go over it. But just a little info on what we do at San Francisco Wine School, online, in person, on a boat, on a space shuttle, wherever you want us, once we all have shots. But I'm thrilled, you know, I've been thrilled to do the Burgundy seminar 4 years in a row in Santa Barbara, but how exciting that we get a full month of it this time doing it online. I think it's great. We're saving up our hugs for in person, but you know, it's great that we're able to do this together. Thank you, Gary, for that nice comment. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for leading us through. Thank you, Sarah, Shane, and Patrick. I do want to remind all attendees we have an amazing silent auction happening. And if you enjoyed these wines, we are so fortunate to have some seller collectors on the auction block. We've got a beautiful 1.5 liter from Moraine. Thank you, Shane, for that donation. We have a beautiful 3 liter from Maggy Hawk that is currently on the auction block. And if you loved those Chanson wines, we've got 2 750s to add to your cellar that are also on the auction block. So I want to thank all of our panelists tonight. I want to thank all of our attendees. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback for us, please do let us know. And we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday night for our second WOPN wine case. And if you loved this session tonight, check out all of our other virtual sessions happening at throughout Wine Month for the World of Pinot Noir. And you can go to our website at worldofpinotnoir.com for more information. And with that, we look forward to seeing you all soon. Be well, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week.
Ciao.